Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Faith Focus Weekly Discipleship Podcast. My name is Kevin Rogness, and I'm the Discipleship Director here at Faith Covenant Church. And I want to just remind you, as I always do, to hit the subscribe button, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on any of our podcasting platforms. We just want to make sure that you don't miss out on any content. Today we are taking a little bit of a break from our series on spiritual direction to talk about sabbatical. So you could say we're taking a sabbatical of this episode to talk about sabbatical. Yeah, that wasn't funny. And I'm joined by Pastor Brad, our lead pastor, and you're taking a sabbatical soon. So before we talk about what sabbatical is and what it'll be for you, what does the Bible have to say about sabbatical and rest more generally?
Sure, yeah. So I thought I would maybe, but before I say that, just address the idea that people who live in the workaday world sometimes are like, wait a second, this how do I get a sabbatical? I don't get a sabbatical in my job,
right?
And I want to recognize that many of you watching this might be thinking that doesn't seem fair or something like that as we talk about this. I guess one I'll start with, and as we look at the scriptures here in just a second, the interesting thing is that what we do is a particular vocation, a particular calling, and our fundamental role in life is a unique calling, mm-hmm. And so we don't make widgets. We don't run a business. We are called to shepherd the family of God, and so the way we do what we do, in one sense, gets to look different, mm-hmm. from kind of the way the world does stuff. It should look different. It should be holy, mm-hmm. In what we do. So I recognize, sometimes when I talk about sabbaticals with people who, for lack of a better way of putting it, have a normal job, they're like, wait a second, I thought, you only work on Sunday, and now you're getting 3 months off.
No.
That's not really the case.
For example, you're at work here today, and it is not Sunday.
Yeah. And I sat in probably 6-7 hours of meetings yesterday, and
is that it?
yeah, and I had to write a research paper that everyone wants to be edifying, and I call that a sermon, a research paper that I perform for you and for God, and God then grades it.
Yeah,
or at least I'm held accountable by God for it. So it's it's just kind of interesting what we do, but it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. So all that said, let's start here. So the idea that a sabbatical, according to the employee handbook at Faith Covenant Church, credentialed pastors are eligible for a sabbatical every 7 years. And the word sabbatical comes from the word Sabbath, which is to cease from your work. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so we have that in the first chapter of Genesis. We know that on the seventh day, God ceased from his work, the day of rest. And then as God called the nation of Israel to be his people, and he gave them the 10 commandments. One of those commandments was honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. Mm-hmm. That seventh day. But and then God gave his people a law. He gave kind of 3 types of law for forming his people. There's a moral law, a civil law, and a ceremonial law. Okay, so these are within the first 5 books of your Bible, the Torah. And in Leviticus 25, there's something called the Sabbath year, and then we have the year of Jubilee. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to read this real quick for your edifying and mine. So the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest. a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards, etc., etc., etc. So essentially the land was to lie fallow during that 7th year, which means it was not to be farmed. Okay? And then I'll just read the year of Jubilee, which is right after this in Leviticus 25. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the Day of Atonement. Sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family, property, to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a year of jubilee. Do not sow, do not reap. It is a year to be holy, etc. So I bring all this up, the 7th day of rest, God's call in the 10 Commandments, the 7th year where the land is to lie fallow, and the Jubilee year, because what God did was for the benefit of his people. Jesus says that in the Gospels, he says, the Sabbath wasn't created for God, it was created for you. Because he knows, left to our own devices, we'll work ourselves to death.
Yep.
and it is good for the human body to rest. That's why God created humans to sleep. That's not a product of the fall. That's God's prescription.
That's intent.
Yeah, and why he gave a day of Sabbath rest every week, and it's why in that 7th year the nation of Israel was to let the land lie fallow, and in so doing, their work for a whole year was greatly curtailed in the fields. And so I say all this to say that God believes rest is good.
Yeah.
And in so doing, in taking a Sabbath rest on a weekly basis, I don't work on Mondays. Okay, so Monday is my Sabbath, and Jill and I have real strict boundaries actually around that day. When we cease from our work, it's an activity of faith, practically speaking, because in a sense, God is like, hey, on that 7th year, I want you to trust me. You're going to be fed. You're going to be fine, and the land needs to rest, just like you need to rest. And same with the year of Jubilee. And so what has happened in Christendom, in churches, recognizing that pastoral burnout is a real thing.
Yes. Especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic, we've seen really high rates of pastoral burnout.
Right. In fact, there are probably more. There are, in fact, I know this for certain. There are more pastors leaving the ministry than entering the ministry in the United States. And so that's a thing. And so, thankfully, when I came here 7 years ago, I saw that the employee handbook had that after 7 years, a pastor could take a sabbatical, and so I'm going on a sabbatical. It's a 12-week period. Basically, I'm gone from May 15th to August 15th, and the goal in that is really to cease from my work and to rest, and so that when I come back, in fact, I'll talk more about this in a second, but when I come back, I'm not only refreshed, I'm inspired for ministry.
Yeah. And I want to point out a couple more things about the biblical discussion of rest. One, I just want to reemphasize the aspect of rest for land. It's not just rest for us as people. God wants rest for land, and there's stuff in Deuteronomy about giving animals rest. Yeah. And so rest is really a holistic command for all of creation. It's not just us. And I also like to point out, I always love to point out in conversations of rest that Jesus took naps. Yeah. Jesus valued rest, and we don't necessarily see him taking a 3-month sabbatical because his ministry was only 3 years, but you can see that he valued rest in his time that he was on earth.
Well, and interesting, 'cause I was just looking at this, both You have Moses taking 40 days. You have Elijah taking 40 days. You have Jesus taking 40 days. And I'm getting more than 40 days, but that's also after 31 years of full-time ministry.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So it's like you said, the employee handbook for Faith Covenant Church says every 7 years, but you've only just been here for 7 years now, and now you're saying you also haven't had a sabbatical in previous locations as well. So long overdue for you.
Yeah, one might say. I'm very grateful that the church thinks it's important enough to make it part of the policy.
So you've already said your sabbatical is from May 15th until August 15th, so this summer. So what are you doing? Where are you going?
Yeah.
What's this going to look like for you?
Yeah, so it's... I'll start with this. Many of you know I informed the congregation that a year ago I was applying for the Lilly Clergy Renewal Grant. And the Lilly Clergy Renewal Grant is a wonderful thing. It's a big grant that goes to a pastor and its congregation for a sabbatical. And I applied for the grant. I didn't get it. I've used what I applied for and the rubrics by which I applied to influence what we're going to do. Would you like some water?
That was the problem. It went down the wrong tube.
I think you need a sabbatical.
I won't disagree.
And so in the clergy renewal grant, the goal is leave and take your sabbatical and do what makes your heart sing, which is kind of a wonderful exploration. It's like, what is that? And so I'm going to say all this, and then I'll give you more of an itinerary. So the fundamental theme of our sabbatical is going home. Now, and we're going to actually entering on May 7th here at Faith. We're entering a 3-month journey, all about what is home. What is our theological home? What does it mean to heal in our homes? And so the theme of home is going to be coursing through the veins of our congregation for the summer and for Pastor Brad. And I'm very fascinated with the idea that, the truth that in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, the home that God created was the garden where the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, the man and the woman were with God, and that was their home. And that home was good. It was, the Hebrew word is tov for good, and used in Genesis 1. And that word tov means complete, whole. And I just love the simplicity, because I think we get so caught up in our world in what home, home tends to be based, we base it, the success of home on activity and busyness. And our homes are so busy. But what was good, what was tov in the creation account is the man and the woman with God, and that was enough.
Yeah.
And so we've taken that idea, and so Jill and I are going, fundamentally, we're going on a trip home. And so I'll give you the itinerary now, and you'll see that where home kind of weaves its way in through this. So the first 6 weeks we're going on a tour of Western Europe, and we didn't get the grant, which is a shame. So we tightened our purse strings, and Jill actually lived in Europe, and so she has a number of connections. So about half of our journey we get to stay in places for free.
That's awesome.
with friends of Jill's. So that's wonderful.
Before anybody else asks, I've already asked if I can travel with them as their personal assistant, and they're not taking applications for that role. So, shoot.
Another time, Kevin.
Oh, okay.
So real quick.
Was it my resume? Was that the problem? I just didn't have enough experience as a traveler.
No. Yeah. No. You get to go to Israel next year.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So we fly into Amsterdam, and then we spend the first few days visiting Maastricht and Aachen, Germany. Now, I'll just give you a little glimpse in that one of the fundamental, wonderful parts of Jill's story is that she lived in Maastricht, the Netherlands, for 4 years, and she was instrumental in birthing community Bible study in Maastricht. It's an amazing, miraculous story that maybe have Jill in someday and have her tell this story.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was truly, it's an amazing story. And CBS is still happening there. In
Community Bible study, not the network.
Right.
Although that's also still happening.
Right. Yeah, so we're returning to the home where Community Bible Study was birthed by God using Jill and two other women. It's just an amazing story. And we're also going to be staying with a friend of Jill's who is part of that group, that CBS group. That particular friend has a home in Berlin also, so we're traveling with them to Berlin then for a few days. And then that same friend has a daughter who lives in Heidelberg, Germany. And so we'll be staying with her daughter for 3 days. And then from there, we're traveling to Schladming, Austria.
Okay.
And we'll stay there for a week. And then we fly to Sweden. And so both Jill's and my great-grandparents on different sides of the family are from Sweden. And for those of you who may not know, our denomination, the Evangelical Covenant Church, was born out of what was a movement in Western Europe called Pietism. And that movement was birthed in Sweden, and our great-grandparents were a part of that movement. And then when they immigrated to the United States, they were part of the birthing of the Evangelical Covenant Church. So we'll fly into Stockholm. We'll spend 3 days there, and the Covenant Church has had an influence in Stockholm for generations. And then we'll be in Jönköping, Sweden, which is where Jill spent a semester when she was at North Park University. We'll actually be staying on campus at the place where she stayed. And then we travel just for a couple days to Alingsås, Sweden, where my great-grandfather, Henry Eriksson, was very dear to my father. He lived with my father until my dad was 19, where he grew up before he immigrated to the United States. His farm is actually still in the family.
Oh, wow.
And it's on the National Historic Register in Sweden, and so part of it is preserved in its original kind of form and
That's
state.
awesome.
Yeah, and so I'll meet relatives I've never met, and I'll also get to visit the Covenant Church he grew up in, which is, sorry, I get emotional on these things. It's like, wow, I mean, how profound is that?
Yeah.
And then, so that's in one sense going home, and in the whole time, Jill and I so love to be outdoors, and so the idea of Brad and Jill and God outside is enough. It's home. It's and then there's the idea of us going back to the home of our not only our relatives, but also the birthplace of the church that we've been a part of for our whole lives. And then we go to Paris for some R&R sightseeing, and then we come back to Maastricht and we spend another week there visiting some other friends, and then we come home. And then the last 6 weeks are, well, I would say 5 weeks is just rest here stateside, doing different things with family, riding bikes quite a bit, I'm sure. And then my granddaughter is due, my oldest daughter is pregnant and due with her first child on July 29th. So we will then spend the last week of the sabbatical in Columbus, Ohio, visiting our new granddaughter.
That'll be exciting.
Yeah, and then we come back in the office on August 15th.
Awesome. So that's a long period of time, and certainly for this first 6 weeks, not in the States, you won't be attending here. In the latter part of the portion, when you are in Minnesota, will you be attending at Faith Covenant or kind of taking some space?
No, we'll be taking space. We'll be visiting other churches, and it's actually part of the prescription in a sabbatical that you really you're ceasing from your work. And so if we were to come here on Sundays, it immediately would seem like work. I'd have people asking me about work. And so it's creating some boundaries so that, in one sense, the land lies fallow.
Yeah.
and it's also, it's a great journey for our pastoral staff to visit other churches and see, what are they doing that's working, what's not working, and so forth. So that'll be a fun journey. I won't be checking email. You can send me an email or send a text and I won't respond because it's designed to have clear boundaries.
Yep. So then, in the meantime, while you're doing all of those things, how are responsibilities being handled here for the things that you normally do? Now, certainly, of course, it's summer, so it's a little bit of a quieter time for us to an extent. But how are those responsibilities and roles being fulfilled?
Yeah, so it's a simple answer. One, we have an exceptional staff that is going to be just fine without me, and I have great confidence in the staff to accomplish what needs to be accomplished here. Don't hesitate to contact the church office in any way that you would with me here or not. We have many capable hands here. Ultimately, Pastor Shar is the one in charge in my absence. So if some sort of authoritative something needs to happen, that will fall to Shar and or the council at that time. But you'll blink and I'll be back.
And then like Sunday sermons, who's going to be preaching during that time?
Thank you for asking that, because again, we have a very capable staff with very gifted speakers, yourself being one of them. And so the preaching duties will be handled mostly by Kevin, Shar, and Pastor Sarah. And I believe each of you over those 12 weeks have 2 Sundays you're preaching. And then I've also invited in, so we're going to go on a journey in June and July called Going Home, which actually is a look at the 6 affirmations of the Evangelical Covenant Church. What is our theological home, so to speak? Where do we land when it comes to certain things? And so during that time, we'll have 4 guest speakers from our denomination. One of them is a wonderful friend and spiritual director, John March. Another is Pastor Paul Robinson, who works for our denomination in Chicago but resides here in Minnesota. Another is one of our missionaries, who's a covenant missionary in Mexico, Carl Peterson. He'll be preaching. And then we have a special guest, actually. We will have Pastor Kara Stromberg, who is actually our first female conference superintendent. She will be preaching on what it means to be a church that grounds itself in freedom in Christ, and that is in July. So having Pastor Sarah here is kind of a special treat.
Pastor Kara,
forgive me.
We always have Pastor Sarah with us, yes. But yes, Pastor Kara Stromberg will be visiting.
July 16th, I believe.
Yep. So lots of exciting things going on with that. And so you're coming back August 15th. We mentioned that. Have any pastors from Faith Covenant gone on sabbatical before? Is there precedent for us to have this?
There is, thankfully. My first year here, actually, Pastor Shar had her first sabbatical, and she that was long overdue as well. She's been on staff for at that time she'd been on staff well over 2 decades. And so she my first summer here, she was on sabbatical, and she'll be up for another one soon.
So not an unusual thing for pastors to be on sabbatical, and it's certainly something that's been regular here. And it was probably happened for some of the other pastors that preceded you and Pastor Chard too. I know not all of them were here for 7 years, but I'm guessing Ross Foley at some point had a sabbatical, but
I
don't remember.
So. Interestingly, back in Ross's day, sabbaticals were not as prescribed as they are now. And they're more prescribed these days in a response to decades of ministry where pastors were just not getting a break and getting burned out and so forth.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not sure whether Ross had one. One more thing I wanted to note, if I may, is, as I think about my sabbatical, I am again guided by the grant I applied for, and part of the goal of the grant, they said in your application, was, what do you need to do so that when you come back, you can't wait to be in ministry again. And so that's really part of my goal, is what does that look like? And so I have this time with Jill and so forth, and going home. But as I think about this, I really see these 12 weeks as an act of worship, and just falling more in love with God, because it is for a pastor, for pastoral staff, it is what God is doing in us, which is the greatest gift we can give to our congregations. And so, it's in another way, thinking of the John 15 abiding in the vine. This is a kind of a 12-week abiding more deeply into the vine that is Christ, so that more fruit will be born out of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So during all this time where you're spending intentional time in rest and in worship, what should we be doing as a congregation here that's intentional? Because, we are a family of God, and as kind of one of the primary leaders of the family, when that person is gone, that means other people have to take intentional steps. Right. So what's important for us to do in your absence?
Yeah, so I was just talking to someone this morning, and I have a couple of friends who just talk about the idea of the value of presence, the value of showing up. And I think it was Yogi Berra who said, I can't remember who it was, basically a good recipe for life is show up.
Yeah.
and what can happen, and I see this happen all the time, and it happens in not just our church but other churches. You say, well, the preacher I like the most is not going to be there, so I'm not going to go, or I'm going to go somewhere else. Or I'm just going to, well, I'll put it this way, a mentality that has emerged, especially with post-COVID, and we're part of we facilitated this in one sense, but with live streaming being so available, and the mentality that the church is just exists to be a dispenser of helpful information for me. So if I can just get helpful information somewhere, whether it be at the church or some other church or some TED Talk or whatever, then that's enough. And that's unbiblical. It's not real. It's magical thinking, and it misses what God has called the church to be. Mm-hmm. The Church of God is our home. It's the family of God, and so, let's say, I was to die tomorrow.
Please don't.
I'm not going to. But faith that endured. When Pastor Ross fell off the roof years ago and was out of ministry for quite some time, when I was in my bike accident. What makes the family of God work is you showing up and being present, loving God and loving others. You can love God without being with others, but you will never understand the love of God without having to bump into others.
Yeah.
It is the very character of God that compels us to do life together and have to bump into each other, so that we are forced in the most beautiful way to give grace to each other and persevere with each other and walk with each other, pick each other up, and correct each other when we're out of bounds. And so the life of the family of God is just vital. And so, whether I'm here or whether I'm not here, I ask you to think of Faith Covenant Church as your church home. And a church home is not something I reckon you just don't, virtually go home at Thanksgiving.
Right.
You show up.
Yeah.
You're present. I recognize some of you watching this today are in a situation where it's very hard for you because of health or other situations to show up physically. I'm glad you show up online. I'm glad we have this medium right here that we can communicate. But for those that can, it's important. It's important for you and your loved ones to make the value of the church family as home a reality, a practical reality with intentionality.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a lot of information that we've covered about the sabbatical, and certainly we'll be also having some time of prayer for Brad on the Sunday before he goes on sabbatical, so we kind of have a chance to kind of say goodbyes. So we just wanted to do this episode because we know people have been asking, isn't he going on sabbatical? What's that about? So we just wanted to have an opportunity to really explain in depth what this is and what this is going to be for you and for us. So any last things that you want to share about sabbatical or your sabbatical specifically?
Finally, I'll just say I'll be praying for Faith Covenant Church. I pray you daily pray for Faith Covenant Church and its staff. I pray as I'm gone that you'd be praying for me and Jill, so that we would simply just fall more in love with God.
And have safe travels, because you're moving around a lot.
Safe and healthy, that would be good.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us once again, and we're excited for your sabbatical. I'm excited to hear and see all the pictures and all that. And so I love travel stories, so I'm excited to kind of hear that.
Travel. I do too.
Yeah. So thank you, Pastor Brad, for joining us. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening, and we hope you have a wonderful and blessed afternoon.